The Aurora Express wasn't on any official Alaskan Railroad schedule. I found it through a friend of a friend. The sort of connection you need when you're desperate to get to Fairbanks in January, during the worst blizzard in decades. Every airport was closed. The Alaska Railroad had suspended service. The highways were impassable walls of snow. My father was dying in Fairbanks Memorial Hospital, and the doctors said he wouldn't last the week. I needed to get there. Rules of nature and physics be damned. That's when Kieran, an old college roommate who'd moved to Anchorage years ago, mentioned an alternative. "It's not exactly conventional," he'd said, his voice crackling over our poor connection. "But the Aurora Express runs regardless of weather. It's how the old-timers get around when everything else shuts down." He directed me to a small wooden building 2 blocks from the official Alaska Railroad depot. The structure looked like it had been standing since the gold rush days, its timbers dark with age, windows glowing amber against the swirling snow. A hand-painted sign read simply, "Aurora Express, Passage North." Inside, a native Alaskan woman with silver hair and eyes like black ice sat behind an antique ticket counter. Her weathered face was a map of wrinkles, yet her movements were precise as she wrote out my ticket with a fountain pen. She didn't ask for my destination, just my name. "Catherine Ivanoff," I told her, stamping snow from my boots. She looked up sharply. "Any relation to Mikhail Ivanov of Fairbanks?" My breath caught. "My father. How did you—" "Small state. Long memories." Her expression softened slightly. "He rode with us many times in his younger days. The Express remembers its passengers." She slid the ticket across the counter, thick parchment with my name, and the date inscribed in elegant script that seemed to shimmer in the lamplight. "Track 3 leaves at midnight," she said. "1 bag only. No electronic devices function aboard. The journey takes 8 hours precisely." I checked my watch, 11:17 p.m. Plenty of time. "One more thing," she added, handing me a sealed envelope. "The rules. Read them carefully before boarding. Follow them exactly. No exceptions." "Rules?" I asked, confused. I'd taken Alaska Railroad's official trains before and didn't recall any special protocols. "The Aurora Express runs through places where the boundary is thin," she replied cryptically. "Where the lights dance and the spirits walk. Safe passage requires respect for certain traditions." Outside, the blizzard howled like a living thing, snow blasting horizontally past the windows. No conventional train could possibly run in this weather. "This train," I said slowly. "It will definitely reach Fairbanks by morning." "The Express always reaches its destination," she replied. "Whether all its passengers do depends entirely on how well they follow the rules." I found Track 3 behind the building, a narrow-gauge rail line that wasn't on any map I'd studied of the Alaska Railroad system. An ancient steam locomotive idled there, its black iron body gleaming with ice crystals, windows glowing with warm golden light. 5 passenger cars stretched behind it, their wooden exteriors carved with intricate patterns that resembled both native Alaskan art and something older. Something I couldn't quite identify. As I approached, the conductor stepped down from the train. A tall, gaunt man with pale skin and eyes the exact color of the northern lights. He wore an immaculate black uniform with brass buttons that seemed to reflect light that wasn't there. "Ticket and rules, please," he said, his voice resonant despite the howling wind. I handed him my ticket, which he punched with an old-fashioned conductor's tool. The holes it left formed a constellation I didn't recognize. "Have you read the rules, Ms. Ivanoff?" he asked. "Not yet." His expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested disappointment. "I recommend you do so immediately upon boarding. We depart in 20 minutes. I climbed aboard the nearest passenger car, finding an interior more luxurious than I'd expected. Polished wood paneling, brass fixtures, and plush crimson seats. Only a handful of other passengers were scattered throughout the car, all of them remarkably still and quiet. No one looked up as I entered. Finding an empty window seat, I settled in and opened the envelope. The conductor's gaze intensified. "Ms. Ivanov, your father understood the importance of tradition. He respected the boundaries. That's why he always arrived safely." He checked his antique pocket watch. Midnight. We depart. The train lurched forward with a hiss of steam, wheels grinding against the narrow tracks. Through my window, I watched the small station slip away, quickly swallowed by the swirling blizzard. Soon there was nothing visible beyond the glass except sheets of white broken occasionally by the dark silhouettes of spruce trees. I settled back in my seat, clutching the rules in one hand and my ticket in the other. 8 hours to Fairbanks. 8 hours to my dying father. All I needed to do was follow some quaint superstitions, and I'd see him again. The train picked up speed, the rhythmic clacking of wheels against tracks almost hypnotic. Outside, the howling wind gradually harmonized with the train's movement, creating what sounded disturbingly like distant singing. I looked around at my fellow passengers. An elderly Athabascan man dozed in the corner, a carved walking stick propped against his knee. Across the aisle, a young woman in modern cold-weather gear stared intently at a leather-bound book. Near the front, a man in a parka so covered with ice and snow that it looked more like a natural formation than clothing sat perfectly still, facing forward. None of them acknowledged me or each other. None spoke. The only sounds were the train's mechanical symphony and that strange, distant singing in the wind. I realized I was already unconsciously following Rule 3. Do not look directly at other passengers for extended periods. As midnight deepened toward 1 a.m., exhaustion began to pull at me. I leaned my head against the cold window, watching my breath fog the glass. The fog crystallized almost instantly into delicate patterns, not quite faces, but with an organization that seemed just on the edge of deliberate design. My eyes grew heavy. Despite the strangeness, despite my worry for my father, the rhythm of the train was lulling me toward sleep. Just as my consciousness began to drift, I heard it. My name, whispered directly behind my seat. "Catherine." It was my father's voice. I stiffened, instantly awake. Rule 6 flashed in my mind. Should you hear your name called by a voice you recognize, do not respond. "Catherine," came my father's voice again, weaker this time. "Help me." Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to answer, to help. But something about the conductor's intensity when he'd spoken of the rules kept me frozen in place, eyes fixed on the frost patterns growing across my window. "Please, Katya," the voice whispered, using my childhood nickname. "I'm cold, so cold." I bit my lip hard enough to draw blood, the sharp pain helping me maintain silence. Outside, the blizzard intensified, snow pelting the glass like tiny fists, demanding entry. After what felt like an eternity, the whispers stopped. When I finally dared to glance behind me, I saw only an empty seat, the upholstery undisturbed as if no one had ever sat there. The conductor appeared suddenly beside me, though I hadn't heard him approach. "The first test comes to all passengers," he said quietly. "You did well." "Test?" My voice sounded thin against the train's rumbling. "The express must determine if you can be trusted to follow the rules." He produced a silver thermos. "Hot cocoa?" My own, not from another passenger. I hesitated, then accepted, remembering Rule 7. The cocoa was rich and surprisingly complex, with notes of cardamom and something unidentifiable that tingled pleasantly on my tongue. "What happens to those who fail the tests?" I asked. The conductor's eyes shifted momentarily to that aurora color. "They reach a different destination than intended." Before I could press further, the train whistle blew, signaling our approach to the first stop. I checked my watch, surprised to find it was already 1:30 a.m. The train began slowing, wheels grinding against the tracks. Through swirling snow, a small platform gradually materialized. No station building accompanied it. Just a wooden platform with a single lamppost, its light creating a perfect circle of illumination in the darkness. Rule 4 echoed in my mind. The train will make exactly 3 stops before your destination. Do not disembark at any of them, regardless of what you see or hear on the platform. As we pulled alongside the platform, I saw a solitary figure standing in the light, a young woman in clothing far too light for the bitter cold. She wore what looked like a summer dress, her arms bare, dark hair loose around her shoulders. Despite the blizzard, not a single snowflake seemed to touch her. When she turned toward our car, my breath caught. Though I'd never met her, I recognized her instantly from old photographs. She was my grandmother, not as I'd known her in her final years, but as she'd been in her youth, beautiful and stern-faced, looking exactly as she had in her wedding photo with my grandfather. She stared directly at me through the window, her eyes reflecting the lamplight like burnished copper. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear through the glass. "She's saying my name," the young woman across the aisle whispered, her book forgotten in her lap. "That's my mother. She died when I was 3. The woman on the platform continued mouthing words, her expression growing increasingly desperate. She pressed a hand against the invisible barrier of cold that seemed to surround the train, leaving a print that steamed in the frigid air. The young woman across from me rose unsteadily to her feet. "She needs me," she murmured, moving toward the door at the end of our car. I remembered Rule 1 about not moving between cars, but she wasn't headed for another car. She was heading for the exit, for the platform. "You can't," I said, keeping my voice low. "The rules. We can't disembark at the stops." She paused, turning back with tears freezing on her cheeks. "But it's my mother. Look at her. She's freezing out there." On the platform, the woman who wore my grandmother's face had begun to cry, her tears turning to ice crystals that shattered against the platform like tiny glass beads. The sound carried clearly through the walls of the train, a delicate, heartbreaking music. Other passengers stirred uneasily in their seats, but no one else moved toward the doors. "Please," I said to the young woman, "remember the rules." She wavered, looking back toward the platform where the figure now held out imploring hands. For a terrible moment, I thought she would open the door. Then the elderly Athabascan man spoke up for the first time, his voice like gravel wrapped in velvet. "That is not your mother, child. Your mother has found peace. That is a hungry thing wearing her face." The train whistle blew again, 2 short blasts. With a lurch, we began pulling away from the platform. The figure dropped all pretense of humanity, its face contorting in rage, stretching beyond the constraints of human anatomy, as it let out a silent scream of fury. The young woman collapsed back into her seat, sobbing quietly. The elderly man resumed his apparent dozing, though I noticed one eye remained slightly open, watching the car. Outside, the blizzard swallowed the platform and its occupant, returning us to a world of swirling white. I pressed my face against the cold window, thoughts turning to my father. If that thing on the platform could wear my grandmother's face so perfectly, what else might be waiting at the other stops? And more unsettling, Why had it chosen to appear as someone meaningful to the young woman, and not to me? The train plunged deeper into the Alaskan wilderness, the rhythmic clacking of wheels creating a hypnotic backdrop to the night. According to my watch, it was nearing 2 a.m. The temperature inside the car had dropped noticeably, causing passengers to tighten scarves and pull on gloves. The young woman who'd nearly left the train had calmed somewhat, though she kept her gaze fixed on her lap. No one spoke about what we'd witnessed at the platform. Needing to stretch my legs, I considered visiting the bathroom at the end of the car. Rule 12 came to mind. The bathroom is for emergencies only. If you must use it, knock 3 times and wait for an answering knock before entering. My bladder wasn't quite at emergency status yet, so I remained seated, watching frost patterns grow more complex on my window. They had begun to resemble fern-like structures, reminiscent of the traditional U-peak patterns my father had sometimes carved into driftwood. Suddenly, the elderly Athabascan man sat up straight, alert. "Kulapare," he said in a language I didn't understand. Then in English, "They come." The lights. Looking out my window, I gasped. The blizzard had abruptly ceased, the sky clearing to reveal a vast expanse of stars. And dancing among them, curtains of green and purple light shimmered and pulsed. The aurora borealis in its full, breathtaking glory. The northern lights seemed unusually active, rippling and swirling with almost sentient movement. As I watched, entranced, the patterns began to shift, forming what looked disturbingly like elongated human figures dancing across the sky. Their movements reminded me of the shadow puppets my father used to create on our cabin walls during winter power outages, except these shadows moved with purpose, and they were looking down at our train. Rule 5 jolted me back to awareness. If you see the northern lights through your window, close the curtain immediately and do not open it until the conductor announces it is safe. I reached for the curtain pull just as one of the aurora figures seemed to notice me watching. It paused its celestial dance, its head tilting in an uncomfortably human gesture of curiosity. Then, with deliberate slowness, it extended a limb of shimmering green light toward our train. I yanked the curtain closed with trembling hands. Around the car, other passengers were doing the same, their movements urgent but controlled. Only the man in the ice-covered parka remained still, staring out at the lights with an expression of longing so intense it was almost painful to witness. "Sir," I called softly. "The rules say to close the curtains when the lights appear." He turned toward me slowly, ice cracking around his collar. His eyes reflected the aurora perfectly, as if the lights themselves were dancing inside his pupils. "But they're calling me home," he whispered, his breath visible not as normal steam but as tiny, perfectly formed snowflakes. "Can't you hear them singing?" And suddenly, I could. A high, ethereal melody penetrated the train's walls, voices singing in a language that predated human civilization. The sound resonated in my bones rather than my ears, its beauty so intense it brought tears to my eyes. The train lurched violently as something impacted the roof. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. Outside, beyond the few curtains still open, the aurora figures had descended, surrounding the train in a nimbus of unearthly light. The man in the parka pressed his hand against his window, ice spreading from his fingertips in crystalline patterns. The window began to frost over from the outside as well, creating the distinct impression that something on the other side was reaching back. The conductor appeared at the front of the car, his voice cutting through the mesmerizing song. "Close all curtains immediately. Do not look at the lights." Most passengers complied, but the man in the parka remained transfixed. With surprising speed, the conductor moved to his side, forcibly pulling the curtain closed. For a moment, the two men struggled silently, Then the parka-clad man slumped in his seat, eyes closing as if drugged. The singing intensified, becoming almost frantic. Something scraped along the roof of our car, the metal groaning under pressure from above. The temperature dropped precipitously, cold enough now that my breath froze in clouds before my face. I remembered the final instruction on the rules sheet. If you hear singing in a language you don't understand, cover your ears and recite the names of those you love until it stops. Pressing my hands over my ears, I began whispering, Mikhail Ivanov, Elena Ivanov, Peter Ivanov, listing my father, mother, and brother in a desperate litany. Around me, other passengers were doing the same, their lips moving in silent recitation of their own beloved names. The elderly Athabascan man rocked slightly as he chanted, clutching his carved walking stick with white-knuckled intensity. The train whistle cut through the night, a long, defiant blast that somehow matched the resonance of the Aurora's song, challenging it. The lights in our car dimmed for exactly 3 seconds, then blazed back to full brightness. Outside, the singing stopped abruptly. The pressure on the roof eased. Through my curtained window, I could see the glow of the northern lights receding, retreating back to the sky. The conductor moved through the car, checking each passenger briefly. When he reached me, he nodded once in approval. The names anchor you to your world, he said quietly. They remember who you are, even when the lights try to make you forget. What happened to the man in the parka? I asked. The conductor's expression remained carefully neutral. He heard the lights too clearly. Some passengers are more susceptible to their call. Will he be okay? That depends on how strongly his names still bind him. He checked his pocket watch. It's 2:17. The dining car is serving tea. You're invited to attend if you wish. I glanced around at my fellow passengers. The man in the parka sat unnaturally still, frost creeping across his features. The young woman stared resolutely at her book, though her eyes weren't moving across the pages. The elderly Athabascan man was the only one who seemed composed, nodding to me with something like respect in his gaze. Rule 8 came to mind. The dining car serves hot tea at 2:17 a.m. You may attend if invited. If you go, leave something personal at your seat to mark it as occupied. I removed my blue wool scarf, handmade by my mother years ago, and draped it carefully over my seat. Whatever strangeness this journey held, I suspected that the invitation to tea might provide some answers. I'd like to attend, I told the conductor. Follow me, he replied, turning toward the front of the car. And remember, do not attempt to move between cars on your own. The spaces between are unpredictable at night. Are all the passengers alive? I asked hesitantly. Thomas sipped his tea before answering. The Aurora Express carries many types of travelers. Some journey to reunite with family. Some flee from something worse than death. Some are returning to places they only half remember. He fixed me with his penetrating gaze. And some don't yet know their true destination. I'm going to see my father in Fairbanks, I said firmly. He's dying. I need to get there before. I couldn't finish the sentence. Thomas nodded sympathetically. The Express honors intention, but it also follows deeper currents. Those who board with pure purpose usually reach their desired destination. Usually. A bell chimed softly, and the conductor appeared at the front of the dining car. Second stop approaching in 10 minutes. All passengers should return to their assigned cars. Thomas drained his teacup and stood, retrieving his walking stick. Remember the rules, Catherine Ivanov, especially at the second stop. It tests differently than the first. As we prepared to navigate the strange passage back to our car, I asked the question that had been troubling me most. The man in the parka, the one who was listening to the lights, what will happen to him? Thomas's expression grew solemn. Some passengers find that their true destination isn't where they thought. The Aurora speaks to those who already belong partly to its world. And my father. He rode this train often, you said. Mikhail knew the rules better than most. He respected the boundaries. Thomas hesitated. But he also negotiated with them. It's a dangerous game. Before I could ask what he meant, the conductor beckoned us toward the passage. The return journey through the between space seemed quicker but somehow more disorienting, the glimpsed landscapes darker and less familiar. When we emerged back in our passenger car, I immediately noticed two things. My scarf remained undisturbed on my seat, and the man in the ice-covered parka was gone. In his place was a perfect outline of frost on the seat and window, gradually melting into a puddle on the floor. I returned to my seat, wrapping my scarf around my neck, its familiar wool comforting against my skin. My mother had knitted it from blue yarn the exact color of Alaskan glacier ice, a parting gift when I'd left for college in the lower 48. Now it felt like armor against the strangeness surrounding me. What happened to him? I whispered to Thomas as he settled into his seat across the aisle. He found his true destination, the old man replied. Or it found him. The young woman who had nearly left the train at the first stop now sat with her knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. Her eyes darted nervously toward the windows, though all curtains remained firmly closed. Outside, the blizzard had resumed, the wind's howl occasionally rising to a shriek that sounded disturbingly like my name. I checked my watch. 3:05 a.m., not quite halfway to Fairbanks. As if reading my thoughts, Thomas spoke again. Time moves differently on the express. The journey takes exactly 8 hours for everyone, but those hours don't always contain the same number of minutes. Before I could ask what he meant, the train began to slow. The whistle blew, a mournful sound that echoed longer than it should have across the frozen landscape. "Second stop," Thomas said, his grip tightening on his walking stick. "Remember Rule 4. The train will make exactly 3 stops before your destination. Do not disembark at any of them, regardless of what you see or hear on the platform." This platform appeared more substantial than the first, a proper small station with a rustic wooden building. A sign identified it as Mirror Creek, though I knew no such place existed on any Alaska Railroad map. The station appeared warm and inviting, golden light spilling from its windows onto the snow-covered platform. Unlike the previous stop, this platform held no solitary figure. Instead, what looked like a celebration was underway. A group of people laughing and dancing to music I could faintly hear through the train's walls. They wore a mixture of modern and traditional Alaskan clothing, parkas trimmed with wolverine fur, kuspuks with intricate beadwork, sealskin boots. As our train pulled alongside the platform, several of them turned toward us, raising glasses in friendly toasts. Their faces were flushed with warmth and what appeared to be kvasmak, a potent homebrew alcohol popular in remote Alaskan villages. They seemed so normal, the young woman whispered, pressing her fingertips to the window. Indeed, nothing about them suggested the otherworldly wrongness of the first stop's solitary figure. These appeared to be ordinary Alaskans enjoying a late-night gathering. A man stepped forward from the group, middle-aged with a bushy beard and bright eyes creased with laugh lines. He held up a handwritten sign, "Catherine Ivanov, your father sent us." My breath caught. How could they possibly know I was on this train? How could my father, bedridden in a Fairbanks hospital, have sent anyone? The man gestured enthusiastically for me to join them. pointing at his watch and then toward the north, suggesting urgency and the direction of Fairbanks. "It's a trap," Thomas said quietly. "The second stop always offers what seems reasonable, a shortcut, a faster route, friendly faces." As if hearing him, the bearded man shook his head and held up a second sign. "Not a trap. Medical emergency, faster by snow machine. We'll get you there by dawn. Last chance to say goodbye." My heart lurched. The hospital had said my father had days, not hours. Had his condition worsened? Was this my last opportunity to reach him in time? The group on the platform had gathered behind the bearded man now, their expressions concerned and encouraging. One woman, Athabascan by her features, pointed north and nodded solemnly, as if confirming the urgency. "It's a reasonable offer," I whispered, half to myself. "Snow machines can navigate terrain that trains can't. They could get me to Fairbanks faster." "The second stop knows your deepest fears," Thomas replied. "It offers solutions that speak to your desperation." As if to counter his warning, the bearded man pressed a cell phone to the window, showing me a text message. Though I couldn't make out the sender's information, the content was clear. "Dad critical. Hours, not days. Get here however you can." The rational part of my brain registered the impossibility. Cell service was notoriously non-existent along much of the Alaska Railroad route, especially during blizzards. Yet the emotional part of me, the part terrified of arriving too late, began calculating how quickly snow machines could reach Fairbanks from here. My hand moved toward the window latch. "My grandson died 6 years ago," Thomas said suddenly. "Hunting accident near Talkeetna." The second stop showed me a platform where he stood alive and well, claiming the reports of his death were mistakes. His voice carried the weight of old grief. I nearly stepped off the train. I hesitated, torn between Thomas's warning and the urgent need to reach my father. But what if it's true this time? What if this is different? The bearded man outside was becoming visibly agitated, tapping his watch and making urgent gestures. He pressed another sign against the window. "Catherine, your father made us promise to get you there. Remember the cabin at Norris Glacier? The moose hunt when you were 10? My breath caught. That hunting trip was a cherished memory few people knew about. My first successful hunt, where I'd taken down a moose with my father's guidance. How could these strangers know such details? The young woman across from me had moved to the edge of her seat, watching the exchange with wide eyes. "They seem to know you," she whispered. "Maybe they're really sent by your father." The train whistle blew, a warning that departure was imminent. I had seconds to decide. I looked more carefully at the people on the platform. They appeared perfectly normal, bundled against the cold, breath fogging in the frigid air. Yet something about their movements seemed subtly wrong, too synchronized, as if they were all controlled by a single mind. And their eyes, all of them, regardless of ethnicity or apparent age, had the same shade of blue, the precise blue of glacier ice, the blue of my mother's yarn. I glanced down at my scarf, then back at the platform. The bearded man's parka was trimmed with blue fur, the exact same shade, a biological impossibility. As I noticed this detail, his expression changed. Friendly urgency, transforming into something calculated and cold. The crowd behind him shifted, their movements suddenly rippling in unison like a single organism. I withdrew from the window, clutching my scarf tightly. "No," I said firmly. "I'll stay on the train." The figures on the platform went perfectly still. Then, with mechanical precision, they all turned their heads to track our train as it began pulling away from the station. The bearded man's face stretched into an impossibly wide smile, revealing teeth that gleamed blue in the station lights. As we accelerated back into the blizzard, I saw the entire station shimmer and fade like a mirage, leaving nothing but empty wilderness where it had stood. "The second stop is the most dangerous," Thomas said, nodding with approval. "It studies you during the journey, learning exactly what offer you would find most difficult to refuse." "How did they know about the hunting trip?" I asked, my hands still trembling. "The express travels through the borders of memory as well as physical space," he replied. "The things that wait at the stops can reach into your mind, pluck out what will serve them best." The conductor appeared at my side, offering a small silver flask. "Norwegian aquavit," he said, "for steadying the nerves after difficult choices." I accepted gratefully, the strong herbal spirit burning a path of warmth down my throat. What would have happened if I'd left the train? The conductor and Thomas exchanged glances. "The things at the second stop feed on potential," the conductor finally said. "On lives unlived, choices unmade, journeys uncompleted. Had you stepped off, you would have become like them, forever caught between destinations." The young woman who had almost left at the first stop was weeping silently now. I realized with sickening clarity that she must have lost someone at the second stop on a previous journey. Perhaps a parent, a sibling, or a friend who had been lured off the train. "Rest now," Thomas advised as the conductor moved away. "The third stop comes just before dawn, and it tests differently than the others." I leaned back in my seat, emotionally drained, but oddly more certain of my path. Whatever strangeness this journey held, I was committed to seeing it through to Fairbanks, to my father. Outside, the blizzard gradually gave way to clear, star-filled skies. The northern lights had disappeared, leaving only the vast Alaskan wilderness sliding past our windows. Endless forests of black spruce, frozen rivers winding like silver ribbons, and the distant silhouettes of mountains sharp against the horizon. As exhaustion finally claimed me, I dreamed of my father's voice telling stories of the old ways, of spirit paths through the snow, and of a train that connected worlds when the aurora danced above. I awoke to the sound of scratching, a delicate, insistent noise like fingernails on glass. The car was dimly lit, most passengers appearing to sleep. My watch read 4:38 a.m., though the darkness outside suggested a much earlier hour. The scratching continued, drawing my attention to my window. Frost had formed on the inside of the glass, spreading in intricate patterns that were unmistakably deliberate. As I watched, the crystalline structures organized themselves into a face, my father's face, rendered with such precision that I could make out the scar above his left eyebrow from an old fishing accident. Rule 9 flashed through my mind. If frost forms on the inside of your window in patterns resembling faces, notify the conductor immediately. I looked around for the conductor, but he was nowhere to be seen. Thomas slept across the aisle, his breathing deep and even, his walking stick clutched even in slumber. The frost face shifted, my father's features morphing into an expression of pain. Tiny ice crystals rearranged themselves to form words beneath the image. "Hurry, Katya." My heart raced. Was this another test, or a genuine message? The rules had protected me so far, but what if this was different? What if my father was truly reaching out through whatever strange magic governed the Aurora Express? The young woman who had almost left at the first stop was watching me now, her eyes reflecting the frost patterns. "Who do you see?" she whispered. "My father," I replied, still scanning for the conductor. "Do you see someone too?" She nodded, gesturing to her own window where similar frost patterns had formed. "My little sister. She died with my mother." Her voice broke. The faces appeared on my last journey too. I didn't report them. Nothing bad happened. That gave me pause. Was Rule 9 merely superstition, or something more? The frost on my window continued to move, my father's face becoming more detailed, more urgent. A new message formed. Breaking the rules. For you. The third stop. Get off. Something about the phrasing felt wrong. My father would never encourage me to break rules, especially ones established for safety. He was methodical to a fault, respectful of traditions and protocols. I pressed the call button near my seat, a small brass fixture that I hadn't noticed before. It made no sound that I could hear, but within moments, the conductor appeared at my side. "Frost faces," I said simply, pointing to my window. His expression remained impassive, but I noticed his hand move to a silver chain around his neck. Something protective, though I couldn't see the pendant clearly. "Move to another seat," he instructed, then turned to the young woman. "Both of you." As we complied, the conductor pressed a small vial of clear liquid to each affected window. The frost hissed and evaporated instantly, leaving the glass clear and dry. "What was that?" I asked, as we settled into new seats farther down the car. "The boundaries thin as we travel deeper into the Nightlands," he replied. "Things try to reach through, using familiar faces to establish connection." "Was it dangerous?" "The faces themselves, no. They're merely messengers. What they invite you to do, that's where the danger lies." He studied my face. "What did your frost face ask of you?" "To leave the train at the third stop." He nodded as if this confirmed something. "The third stop is special. It exists in the moment between night and dawn, where boundaries are at their weakest." Thomas had awakened during our conversation and joined us, leaning heavily on his walking stick. "The frost faces appear when you're getting close to someone who has one foot in the spirit world," he explained. "Like your father." My throat tightened. "So he is dying." Thomas's expression softened. "He's between worlds, which is why they can use his image so effectively. But that doesn't mean he's gone yet." The conductor checked his pocket watch. "Less than 3 hours to Fairbanks. Try to rest." He moved away toward the front of the car, leaving us in relative privacy. "You said my father knew the rules, but negotiated with them," I said to Thomas. "What did you mean?" The old man settled into the seat across from me, his walking stick between his knees. "Your father learned something that few ever discover. The rules of the Express aren't just restrictions. They're a language of sorts, a way to communicate with the boundaries between worlds. I don't understand. The Ivanov family has always had one foot in multiple worlds. Russian, Yupik, American, boundary crossers." Thomas tapped his walking stick thoughtfully. "Your father found ways to travel the Express differently than most, to bend rather than break the rules." A suspicion began forming in my mind. Is that how he met my mother? She always said they met on a train, but I assumed it was the regular Alaska Railroad. Thomas's eyes crinkled with something like approval. "Smart girl?" "Yes, Elena was traveling the Express from Anchorage, running from something she never fully explained. Mikhail helped her reach her destination safely. By bending the rules, by understanding their true purpose. The rules exist not just for safety, but for navigation. Each one governs a different aspect of the journey between worlds." The train whistle blew, a long, mournful sound that suggested we were approaching something significant. Thomas straightened. "The third stop approaches," he said. "It will be different from the others, more personal." "How should I prepare?" I asked, anxiety building in my chest. "The third stop shows each passenger something true. something they need rather than want to see. He squeezed my hand briefly. It will hurt, but it won't lie to you. Outside, the darkness had begun to soften almost imperceptibly toward dawn. Stars still dominated the sky, but the horizon showed the first hint of lightning. We were approaching the liminal time between night and day, the threshold hour when, according to my father's stories, the spirit world was closest to our own. The train began to slow, wheels grinding against tracks that couldn't possibly exist in any official transportation record. The whistle blew again, this time in a pattern that sounded almost like a phrase in a language just beyond my understanding. "Remember," Thomas said as the train's brakes engaged, "at the third stop, truth and temptation are often the same thing." The third platform materialized gradually, as if the boundary between existence and non-existence was permeable here. Unlike the previous stops, this station had no building, no waiting room, no signs. It was simply a wooden platform floating in a sea of pristine snow, illuminated by a single lantern that cast a perfect circle of golden light. And standing in that circle, with painful clarity, was my father. Not a simulacrum or a spirit wearing his face, but Mikhail Ivanov himself, exactly as I remembered him from my childhood. Strong and tall in his worn trapper's coat, face weathered by decades in the Alaskan wilderness, eyes clear and alert. He looked younger than when I'd last seen him, healthier, but undeniably himself. He smiled when he saw me, raising a hand in the subtle greeting gesture that was uniquely his. Half wave, half salute. My heart constricted with longing so intense it felt physical. "That's really him, isn't it?" I whispered to Thomas. The old man nodded slowly. "The third stop exists in multiple times simultaneously. What you see is your father as he was, but also as he is, a memory and a truth combined." My father's lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear through the glass. He pointed to something beside him that I hadn't noticed before, a narrow path leading away from the platform, marked by small blue lights that reminded me of foxfire. The path disappeared into a stand of spruce trees that somehow seemed more substantial, more real than anything else in the landscape. "He wants me to follow that path," I said, my voice tight with emotion. Thomas's expression remained carefully neutral. "The third stop offers a choice, not between truth and falsehood, but between different truths." Rule 4 hung heavy in my mind. Do not disembark at any of the stops, regardless of what you see or hear on the platform. "If I stay on the train, I'll reach Fairbanks by morning," I said, thinking aloud. "I'll see my father in the hospital, if he's still alive." "Yes." "And if I take that path?" Thomas hesitated. "You'd see your father as he was. You'd speak with him in a way that hospital machines and medications might not allow. But it wouldn't be in Fairbanks, and it wouldn't be in your world." My father knocked gently on the window, drawing my attention back to him. When our eyes met, he gestured to his heart, then to mine, our old signal for absolute truth between us. Then he pointed again to the path with its blue lights. The conductor appeared beside us, his expression solemn. "Ms. Ivanov, the choice is yours alone, but it must be made quickly. We cannot linger at the third stop." "This isn't like the other stops," I said, still watching my father. "This isn't a trap or a test. This is something else." "The third stop is unique for each passenger," the conductor confirmed. "For some, it offers closure. For others, a new beginning. For a few, it becomes their true destination." My father had moved closer to the window now. He pressed his palm against the glass, and I instinctively raised my hand to meet it, separated by only the thin barrier. Despite the cold outside, warmth radiated through the window where his hand met mine. With that touch came understanding. Not in words, but in feelings and images that flooded my consciousness. My father in his hospital bed, connected to machines that sustained his body, but trapped his spirit. His determination to reach me one last time, to speak with me clear-headed and whole, not diminished by illness. The rules he had learned to bend over decades of riding the Aurora Express, creating this moment, this choice. The path he offered would take me to a place between worlds, where we could talk one last time before he continued on his journey, and I returned to mine. Not a farewell in a sterile hospital room, but a proper goodbye in the wilderness he loved. If I follow him, I asked the conductor, can I return to the train afterward? Those who leave at the third stop rarely return the way they came, he replied carefully. But there are other ways back to your world, if you know how to find them. My father nodded, confirming the conductor's words. He pointed to his chest, then made a gesture like tracing a path. He would show me the way back. The train whistle blew, warning of imminent departure. I had seconds to decide. Your father broke no rules in creating this moment, Thomas said gently. He simply understood them better than most. The choice remains yours. Through the window, I watched my father's expression. Patient, loving, but with an underlying urgency. This opportunity would not come again. I thought of my last visit to Fairbanks 3 months ago, when my father was already declining but still conscious. The hardest thing, he had told me, isn't dying. It's leaving without saying what needs to be said. I made my decision. I'm getting off, I told the conductor, gathering my small bag. There are things we need to say to each other. The conductor nodded once, producing a small silver key that he used to unlock the door at the end of our car. Step carefully from the train to the platform. The space between is wider than it appears. Thomas pressed his walking stick into my hands. Take this. It will help you find your way back when the time comes. The carved wood felt warm, almost alive against my skin. As the door opened, cold air rushed into the car, bringing with it the crisp scent of spruce and wood smoke. My father's scent. I turned to thank Thomas, but he had already returned to his seat, his eyes closed as if in prayer or memory. Safe passage, Catherine Ivanov, the conductor said formally. May you find what you seek. I stepped from the train onto the platform, expecting the disorientation I'd felt in the between spaces earlier. Instead, the transition felt natural, as if I were simply stepping from one room of my childhood home to another. My father's arms enveloped me immediately, solid and real, and impossibly warm against the Alaskan night. He smelled of pine sap and leather and the tobacco he'd given up years ago, but that had somehow become part of his essence. Katya, he whispered, his voice exactly as I remembered. You came. I had to, I replied, tears freezing on my cheeks. There was too much left unsaid. Behind us, the train whistle blew one final time. I turned to watch the Aurora Express pull away, its golden windows shining like earthbound stars in the pre-dawn light. The young woman who had almost left at the first stop watched me from her window, her expression a mixture of envy and understanding. As the train disappeared into the distance, my father took my hand, leading me toward the path marked with blue lights. We don't have long, he said. The boundary thins only until sunrise, but it's time enough to talk, and time enough for me to show you the way home. Together we walked into the trees, following a path that existed somewhere between memory and reality, between life and what comes after. The walking stick Thomas had given me thumped rhythmically against the frozen ground, each impact leaving a small blue spark like a breadcrumb marking our trail. Behind us, the third stop faded into mist as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. I arrived in Fairbanks on a bright, cold morning 3 days after leaving the third stop, not by train, but by a bush plane piloted by an old friend of my father's who asked no questions about where he'd picked me up, or how I'd come to be standing at a remote airstrip with nothing but a small bag and a carved walking stick. My father had died in the hospital at sunrise the morning I stepped off the Aurora Express, exactly as the doctors had predicted. According to the nurses, he'd been unconscious for days, his passing peaceful and painless. His body had been there in the hospital, but I knew now that his spirit had been elsewhere, walking a path between worlds, creating a space where we could speak one last time. During those hours we spent together in that liminal place, we'd said all the things that needed saying. He told me of his life, his regrets, his pride in the woman I'd become. I shared memories I thought he'd forgotten, and secrets I'd never dared tell him in life. We laughed and cried, and finally said goodbye properly, not in a hospital room surrounded by machines, but in the wilderness he'd loved, beneath a sky painted with the last dance of the northern lights before dawn. When it was time for me to return, he'd shown me how to use Thomas's walking stick to find my way, how to tap it against certain trees in a specific rhythm, how to listen for the hollow echo that indicated a thin spot in the boundary. He'd taught me, in those brief hours, some of what he'd learned in a lifetime of traveling between worlds. The rules exist for a reason, he'd explained as he guided me to the place where I could cross back. Not to restrict, but to navigate. Remember them, Katya. Someday you might need to ride the express again. After the funeral, I returned to the small wooden building near the Anchorage depot, where I'd purchased my ticket. It was exactly as I remembered, though the regular tourists and commuters streaming past seemed unable to see it, their eyes sliding from the coffee shop on one side to the souvenir stand on the other, without registering the weathered structure between. The silver-haired ticket seller recognized me immediately. "Catherine Ivanov," she said without preamble. "You've returned from your journey." "I have," I replied, placing Thomas's walking stick on the counter between us. "This belongs to one of your passengers, Thomas Kingfisher." She smiled, taking the stick with reverent hands. "Thomas will be pleased to have this back. It's been in his family for generations. Will you see him soon?" "The express runs every night," she said simply. "Thomas has been riding with us for nearly 40 years, ever since his grandson's accident. He finds comfort in guiding others through the difficult stops." I processed this information slowly. "So he's not dead?" She laughed softly. "No more than you are. He simply travels different paths now." I nodded, understanding in a way I couldn't have before boarding the Aurora Express. My father taught me some things about those paths, about the rules. Mikhail Ivanov was a special passenger, a boundary walker who recognized that the rules were more than just protection. They were a language for speaking with the in-between places. She studied me with those black ice eyes. "You carry that ability now. Will I ever see my father again? That depends on which paths you choose to walk." She reached beneath the counter and produced a ticket identical to the one I'd purchased before. Thick parchment, with my name written in shimmering script. "The express runs every night, Ms. Ivanov. The only question is whether you wish to board." I stared at the ticket, temptation warring with the memory of my father's final advice. "Live fully in your world, Katya. I'll be waiting when your journey naturally brings you to mine." "Not yet," I said finally, though I didn't refuse the ticket. "But I'll keep this for when the time is right." The ticket seller nodded approvingly. "A wise choice. The boundaries should be respected, even by those who can cross them." As I turned to leave, she called after me. "Ms. Ivanov, the rules may change slightly on your next journey. They always do. but their purpose remains the same: to guide travelers safely between destinations. Outside, the Alaskan winter sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow-covered streets of Anchorage. Regular trains arrived and departed from the official station, carrying tourists and locals along mapped routes through quantifiable reality. Somewhere, tracks that didn't exist on any mortal survey led into the deepening twilight, toward places where the aurora danced and the boundaries between worlds grew thin, where a train would soon depart, carrying passengers with tickets written in shimmering ink and rules that bent reality itself. I tucked my ticket into my pocket, next to the handwritten list of rules I'd kept as a reminder, and walked into the ordinary world, changed, grieving, but at peace. For now, I had seen my father one last time. I had said goodbye properly, and when the time came to board the Aurora Express again, I would know how to navigate its mysteries. After all, rules exist for a reason. Not to restrict, but to guide us safely between the stations of our lives and beyond.